September 2023. Killeen, Texas. A grandmother vanishes. Her pastor calls the police. Her daughter prints flyers. Leads a search party. Neighbors scour parks, creek beds, parking lots. Church members pray for her safe return. But behind one garage door, something waits. Something no one in that search party could imagine. A witness remembers hearing strange noises that night. Another recalls a chemical smell in the air. Police knock. They're told she's with a friend. They leave. Days later, they come back with a warrant. What they find changes everything. The woman leading the hunt had been standing right over what they were looking for. Marion Vaughn's life in Killeen, Texas, had always been defined by structure, service, and quiet dignity. A respected retired accountant, she was known for her meticulous approach to everything, from balancing a ledger to organizing the weekly Bible study she had led without interruption for more than 20 years. Her home was a modest but well-kept single-story brick house on a quiet street, the kind where neighbors waved from driveways and kept an eye on one another's children. In her earlier years, Marion had built what seemed to be a stable family life. She married young, and together with her husband raised 2 children, Matthew, the eldest, and Latrice, the youngest. Friends and church members remembered the Vaughns as active in community life, attending local events, and often hosting Sunday lunches. But what looked steady from the outside began to shift as the children reached their teenage years. By the mid-2000s, tensions in the Vaughn household had escalated beyond repair. The catalyst would later be traced to Marion's husband's workplace affair. The relationship not only fractured trust but also carried devastating consequences. He contracted HIV and, in turn, transmitted it to Marion. She never publicly disclosed her diagnosis at the time, keeping it within a small circle of medical professionals, but she did confront him over the infidelity. The marriage crumbled under the weight of betrayal and unspoken truths. Following the divorce, the family split in different directions. Matthew, unwilling to take sides, left home altogether, choosing to live on his own rather than with either parent. Latrice, still a minor, remained with Marion, who continued to provide a stable environment despite the personal upheaval. Those who knew her said she never let bitterness show, instead channeling her energy into work, her faith community, and raising her daughter. Life settled into a quieter rhythm in the years that followed, though the separation left lasting marks on the family dynamic. Marion maintained contact with Matthew and encouraged Latrice to stay focused on her future, determined to keep her daughter on a path she could be proud of. What no one could foresee at that time was how drastically those paths would diverge, and how the bonds within the Vaughn family would one day be tested in ways that defied understanding. By her early 20s, Latrice Vaughn's life had taken a turn away from the stability of her mother's home. At 20, she married a man she had met through mutual friends in Killeen. At first, the relationship appeared promising: young love, plans for a family, and the optimism of building a life together. Within a few years, the couple had 3 children, each born about 2 to 3 years apart. But behind closed doors, cracks in the marriage appeared early. Her husband struggled to maintain steady employment, drifting between short-term jobs in construction, warehouse work, and seasonal labor. Financial instability became a constant strain. More troubling were the police visits. Records would later show multiple calls to their address for domestic disputes, each ending with either warnings or temporary separations before Latrice returned home. Friends and neighbors described the marriage as volatile, with frequent arguments escalating into physical altercations. The relationship also introduced Latrice to another destructive force. Her husband began using narcotics recreationally, and over time, she joined him. Drug use became a fixture in their household, eroding what little stability remained. The combination of financial hardship, domestic violence, and substance abuse created an environment where the well-being of the children was often balanced precariously against the couple's conflicts. By the time the marriage reached its 10th year, it had all but collapsed. Latrice eventually separated from her husband, taking the children with her. Seeking a fresh start, she moved in with another man, this time outside the Killeen city limits. For nearly 2 years, she lived with him, but the arrangement offered little improvement. No lasting employment, no real financial security, and continued exposure to unstable influences. The second relationship ended without ceremony. By the close of that chapter, Latrice was a mother of 3 with no permanent home of her own, limited income, and a history of relationships marked by volatility. In early 2023, Latrice Vaughn returned to Killeen with her 3 children in tow. The years of instability had left her without a permanent residence, and with few options, she reached out to her mother. Marion Vaughn, now in her late 60s and retired from her career as an accountant, was living quietly on a modest pension, savings, and Social Security benefits. Despite knowing her daughter's turbulent history, Marion agreed to take them in. Those close to her said it was typical of Marion. Family came first, and she would not see her grandchildren without a stable home. The arrangement began on polite terms, but tensions surfaced almost immediately. Within weeks of moving in, Latrice began using Marion's debit and credit cards without permission. Small transactions at first, gas station purchases, online food orders, soon escalated to larger charges for electronics, clothing, and other goods delivered directly to the house. Bank records would later confirm multiple cash withdrawals made at ATMs across town, often late at night. Marion's careful financial habits began to unravel under the strain. She discovered accounts opened in her name without her consent, linked to, buy now, pay later, payment plans for items she never ordered. Her private information had become just another resource for her daughter to exploit. It wasn't only finances. Latrice began bringing men into the home, introducing them casually to her children and mother. One of these boyfriends stole Marion's most valuable piece of jewelry, a gold necklace she had owned for decades. Another incident was even more disruptive. Late one night, while Marion was asleep, Latrice and the same boyfriend took her car without asking. Hours later, they returned after having crashed it, leaving Marion to deal with the insurance and repair process. Despite these episodes, Marion maintained her composure, addressing the issues directly but without anger. Neighbors later recalled that she never spoke badly of her daughter, even when the signs of strain were apparent. By mid-2023, Marion Vaughn's careful budgeting was showing visible strain. Her monthly bank statements, once precise and predictable, now carried a steady trail of transactions she hadn't authorized. Charges for electronics appeared alongside frequent ride-hailing trips across town. Food delivery orders rang up at odd hours, often when Marion was already asleep. There were even purchases that had no connection to the household at all. Items clearly meant for Latrice's boyfriends, from clothing to electronics and accessories. The withdrawals were constant. ATM cameras later confirmed Latrice making multiple cash pulls from Marion's accounts, sometimes on consecutive days. The once modest savings Marion had preserved since retirement was now shrinking at a rapid pace. She paid her bills, but the surplus she relied on for security was disappearing. Neighbors also began to notice a change at Marion's usually quiet home. Different men came and went at irregular hours, some staying briefly, others seen repeatedly over several weeks. One neighbor recalled seeing an unfamiliar car parked in Marion's driveway overnight more than once, despite Marion's own vehicle sitting unused in the garage. Marion addressed the situation directly with her daughter, reminding her of boundaries and the need to protect the household's stability. Still, she did not force her out. For all the tension, Marion continued to help raise her grandchildren, making school drop-offs, cooking meals, and covering expenses when needed. Those who knew Marion said her patience was deep, but even patience has a threshold. As summer wore on, the lines between temporary support and ongoing exploitation blurred. Marion's tolerance for the financial drain was thinning, even as her commitment to the children kept her from making immediate, drastic changes. The quiet standoff between mother and daughter was growing sharper, and it was only a matter of time before one refusal would push it over the edge. The breaking point came when Marion Vaughn finally refused to hand over more money. By then, her retirement savings had been drained to the edge, and she made it clear she could not, and would not, keep funding her daughter's spending. For Latrice, it was the first outright denial after months of unchecked access. Within days of that refusal, a pattern of activity began that would later be reconstructed through receipts, surveillance footage, and store records. Latrice and her newest boyfriend, 34-year-old Kelvin Brent, were seen on hardware store cameras purchasing a 55-gallon blue plastic drum. The cashier recalled the item clearly. It was large enough to require 2 people to carry it to the vehicle. 2 days later, a pool supply outlet in nearby Harker Heights logged the sale of multiple gallons of muriatic acid to Kelvin. That same day, a discount retailer in Killeen processed their purchase of heavy-duty contractor bags, clear plastic sheeting, and thick rubber gloves. Individually, none of the purchases stood out. Together, they formed a supply list that would later be recognized for what it was: preparation for disposing of a body. Security cameras from neighboring homes and a business across the street documented Kelvin's vehicle making multiple late-night visits to Marion's residence in the week leading up to the murder. On more than one occasion, the car was backed into the driveway, a detail investigators would later note for its potential use in loading large, heavy items discreetly. To those outside the Vaughn home, there was no visible sign of the violent plan taking shape. The house appeared quiet, the children went about their routines, and Marion continued her church commitments. Inside, however, the materials for what would happen next were already assembled, waiting for the night Latrice and Kelvin would act. Investigators would later reconstruct the events of September 18, 2023, through a combination of phone records, neighbor surveillance footage, and the testimony of those inside the house that night. Shortly after 11 p.m., Kelvin Brent's sedan was captured by a neighbor's driveway camera turning onto Marion Vaughn Street. The headlights dimmed as it slowed, then disappeared into Marion's driveway. Phone data placed Latrice's cell inside the residence and Kelvin's arriving minutes later. At approximately 11:30 p.m., 12-year-old Jada Vaughn awoke to muffled thuds and voices coming from the living room. Curious, she stepped out of her bedroom and into the hallway. From the doorway, she saw her mother, Latrice, and Kelvin kneeling over her grandmother, who was lying motionless on the floor. Latrice told her Kelvin was a doctor helping after an emergency. Jada, unsettled but trusting her mother's explanation, returned to her room. In the minutes that followed, the attack escalated. Evidence later indicated Marion had been beaten with enough force to cause fatal head trauma. Once she was dead, Latrice and Kelvin began the dismemberment process. The 55-gallon plastic drum purchased days earlier was brought from the garage into the kitchen area. Plastic sheeting was laid out to contain blood and tissue, and heavy-duty gloves were used to handle the remains. Muriatic acid, acquired from the pool supply outlet, was poured into the drum after the remains were placed inside. The drum was sealed with its lid and moved back into the garage, pushed behind stacked boxes and bins to conceal it from immediate view. Surveillance footage from the same neighbor's home showed Kelvin's vehicle leaving the driveway just after 3 a.m., returning minutes later, likely after discarding soiled items. Phone records confirmed a gap in activity on Latrice's phone during this period, consistent with her involvement in the cleanup. By morning, the home appeared quiet again. The children prepared for school, unaware of the reality in the garage. For the moment, Marion's absence was explained only within the family, and the truth of what had happened in that living room remained behind closed doors. In the hours immediately following Marion Vaughn's killing, Latrice Vaughn turned her attention to erasing any obvious signs of what had happened inside the house. Investigators would later find bleach traces on multiple high-contact surfaces, door handles, light switches, and sections of the living room floor. Items that had absorbed blood were gathered into heavy-duty trash bags, towels, clothing, and sections of plastic sheeting. At 2:14 a.m., a message was sent from Marion's phone to one of her closest church friends. It read simply, "Not feeling well, will rest today." The friend found the wording unusual. Marion rarely missed church activities and normally explained her absence in more detail, but she did not immediately suspect foul play. Phone analysis later confirmed the device never left the residence during this time. The 55-gallon drum was moved back into the garage. Latrice and Kelvin stacked boxes and storage bins in front of it, concealing it from direct view. Open containers of cat litter were placed nearby, along with multiple air fresheners plugged into outlets along the garage wall. Neighbors later reported a faint, sharp odor in the weeks that followed but assumed it was related to cleaning or stored chemicals. By sunrise, the visible areas of the home appeared in order. The children went about their routines. Latrice's demeanor was calm enough to avoid immediate suspicion, but the concealment inside the garage was temporary by design. For the moment, it was enough to buy time, and in that time, she would take further steps to control the narrative of her mother's sudden absence. By the morning of September 19, 2023, the killing of Marion Vaughn was less than 12 hours old. Latrice Vaughn's actions that day would later be a critical part of the timeline investigators used to connect her to her mother's disappearance. Bank records show that by 9:15 a.m., 2 separate ATM withdrawals were made using Marion's debit card, one from a machine less than a mile from the house, the other across town. Surveillance cameras confirmed Latrice was the one making both transactions. Shortly afterward, additional online orders were placed on Marion's credit card, including clothing, cosmetics, and small electronics. Midday, security footage from a laundromat on the east side of Killeen captured Latrice unloading 2 large trash bags of towels and clothing into industrial washing machines. Investigators would later note that many of the items matched what was missing from Marion's home after the crime. In the afternoon, Latrice left the house again, this time with Kelvin Brent. Phone location data and witness statements placed them together at multiple stops, including a known drug house on the outskirts of the city. According to later testimony, the children were left at home unsupervised for several hours. During this period, Marion's phone remained powered off. No calls were made to check in with her church group, friends, or neighbors. Instead, Latrice's financial activity and movements suggested a deliberate return to routine, spending money, tending to personal matters, and avoiding any conversation that might raise alarm. To those outside the Vaughn household, Marion's absence had yet to trigger concern. But that would change quickly when someone who knew her patterns well realized she had vanished from a commitment she never missed. On the evening of September 20, 2023, the absence of Marion Vaughn was felt in a way that could not be ignored. For more than 2 decades, she had attended and led the midweek Bible study at her church without fail. Illness, weather, and personal hardship had never kept her away. That Wednesday night, her empty seat was impossible to overlook. Pastor William Jones, who had known Marion for years, noticed immediately. Between sessions, he stepped into his office and called her cell phone. It rang unanswered. He tried again after the meeting ended, still no response. Text messages sent that night went unread. By the next morning, there was still nothing. Concerned, Pastor Jones drove to Marion's home late on the morning of September 21st. Her car was in the driveway, but no one came to the door when he knocked. He called again from the front step. Silence. Through a front window, the living room appeared tidy and undisturbed. Recognizing this was far outside Marion's normal behavior, Pastor Jones left the property and contacted the Killeen Police Department to request a welfare check. He explained her reliability, the unusual silence, and the fact that no one in her church circle had heard from her in days. The request was logged and dispatched to patrol officers, setting in motion the first official step in what would become a far-reaching investigation. When Killeen police officers arrived at Marion Vaughan's home on the afternoon of September 21, 2023, the driveway held her car but no sign of her. A knock at the door was answered not by Marion or her daughter, but by 12-year-old Jada Vaughn. The officers explained they were there to check on her grandmother's well-being. Jada told them the last time she had seen Marion was late one night earlier in the week. She recalled her mother and a man she identified as Kelvin Brent kneeling beside her grandmother in the living room. According to Jada, her mother said Kelvin was a doctor helping after an emergency, and she had gone back to her room. With no adults present, the officers contacted Latrice by phone. She arrived about 15 minutes later, saying Marion had gone to stay with a friend after not feeling well. When asked if they could look around the property, Latrice agreed to let them see the main areas of the house but refused access to the garage, claiming the door was broken and unsafe to open. As they stood near the garage entryway, the officers noticed a faint but distinct chemical odor. It was strong enough to register as unusual, but without visible evidence of a crime or signs of immediate danger, they lacked probable cause to force entry. They documented their visit, noted Marion's unexplained absence, and advised Latrice to have her mother contact them directly to confirm she was safe. Latrice agreed, but no such call ever came. For now, the welfare check ended without a search, but the unanswered questions about Marion's whereabouts were only beginning to mount. On September 22, 2023, one day after police conducted a welfare check at her home, Latrice Vaughn positioned herself at the center of the effort to find her missing mother. Early that morning, she posted in neighborhood forums, on local Facebook groups, and through church contacts, calling for volunteers to join a community search. She included a photo of Marion and a brief description of her last known sighting, but omitted any mention of the welfare check or police observations from the day before. Latrice had flyers printed with Marion's picture and phone number, claiming the family was desperate for answers. When volunteers arrived at a nearby park that afternoon, they found her seated at a folding table with a handwritten, "Search for Marion" sign. Bottled water and granola bars were stacked to one side. A small container sat in front of her with a label requesting donations for printing costs. She assigned search teams to canvass greenways, creek beds, and wooded walking trails in areas several miles from her home, locations with no documented connection to Marion's disappearance. Latrice told participants she had already covered the neighborhood around Marion's house and insisted they focus their energy elsewhere. Throughout the day, she posed for photos with volunteers and gave brief, emotional appeals about bringing her mother home safely. Church members, neighbors, and even strangers spent hours combing areas Latrice had directed them to, unaware that the woman organizing the effort already knew Marion would not be found there. By the end of the search, nothing had been discovered, but Latrice promised to keep the momentum going. Behind the scenes, however, police attention was shifting. Investigators were beginning to look past the public displays and into the financial, digital, and physical evidence surrounding Marion's sudden disappearance. As public attention turned toward the search for Marion Vaughn, detectives with the Killeen Police Department began piecing together a clearer picture of what had happened. The welfare check had raised concerns, but it was the combination of financial, retail, and surveillance evidence that moved the case forward. Subpoenaed bank records showed a troubling pattern. In the days after Marion was last seen, Her debit and credit cards continued to be used. Withdrawals from ATMs, purchases for clothing, electronics, and online orders. Security footage from multiple ATMs confirmed Latrice Vaughn making the transactions herself. Retail records linked both Latrice and Kelvin Brent to purchases made before Marion's disappearance. A 55-gallon plastic drum from a hardware store, multiple gallons of muriatic acid from a pool supply outlet, and heavy-duty bags, plastic sheeting, and gloves from a discount retailer. Surveillance stills placed Kelvin's vehicle in the parking lots of each location. Another lead came from a pawn shop in Killeen. A search of transaction logs revealed a recent sale of a gold necklace matching the description of Marion's most valuable jewelry. The seller's ID on the pawn record matched Latrice. Automated license plate reader, LPR, data confirmed Kelvin's car had been repeatedly captured entering and leaving Marion's neighborhood late at night in the week before she vanished. The timestamps corresponded closely with the purchases and the estimated time of the murder. When detectives re-interviewed Pastor William Jones, he emphasized Marion's reliability and her deep roots in the church. He stressed that she would never disappear voluntarily, nor would she go without telling someone in her congregation where she was. His statement, combined with the mounting evidence, strengthened detectives' belief that Marion was the victim of foul play, and that those closest to her knew more than they had admitted. With enough probable cause developing, investigators began preparing to take the next decisive step, securing a warrant to search the one part of Marion's home that had so far remained off-limits. On September 27, 2023, Killeen detectives returned to Marion Vaughn's home armed with a search warrant. The scope covered the entire property, including the garage Latrice Vaughn had previously refused to open during the welfare check. Accompanied by cadaver dogs, the search team began with exterior sweeps before moving inside. Within minutes of entering the garage, one of the dogs gave a strong alert near the back wall. Investigators found several large plastic storage bins stacked in front of what appeared to be a sealed blue 55-gallon drum. The containers were moved aside, revealing the drum exactly matching the one purchased by Latrice and Kelvin Brent days before Marion disappeared. The lid was pried open, releasing a sharp chemical odor that filled the garage. Inside was a mixture of liquid and what appeared to be partially dissolved human remains. The contents were carefully transferred to the medical examiner's custody for forensic processing. While crime scene technicians documented the garage, another team conducted a luminol test inside the home. In the living room, the chemical reaction revealed a visible trail of blood residue leading toward the garage entry. Additional traces were found beneath the cleaned surfaces of the doorway and along sections of the kitchen floor. Dental records later confirmed the remains in the drum were those of Marion Vaughn. The condition of the remains was consistent with prolonged exposure to acid, but the medical examiner was still able to determine that Marion had suffered fatal blunt force trauma before dismemberment. The discovery left little doubt that Marion had been killed inside her own home, and that the concealment had been deliberate and planned. With physical evidence now in hand, investigators moved quickly to secure the arrests of the two people they believed responsible. Within hours of the discovery in Marion Vaughn's garage, arrest warrants were issued for Latrice Vaughn and Kelvin Brent. Both were taken into custody without incident on September 27, 2023. The charges reflected the scope of the case: first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, abuse of a corpse, tampering with physical evidence, child endangerment, identity theft, and multiple counts of financial fraud. At the time of her arrest, Latrice offered no statement to detectives. Kelvin initially denied involvement but was confronted with retail receipts, surveillance footage, and ALPR data tying him to the crime. Both were held without bond pending trial. Jada Vaughn, accompanied by a child advocate, provided a sworn statement detailing the night she saw her mother and Kelvin kneeling over an unconscious Marion and was told Kelvin was a doctor. Her testimony was entered into the official record and later presented to the grand jury. In November 2023, both defendants were formally indicted. Their joint trial began in February 2024 at the Bell County Courthouse. Over 3 weeks, jurors heard testimony from forensic experts, financial investigators, the pastor, neighbors, and retail employees who sold the incriminating supplies. The prosecution presented the timeline of events supported by physical evidence, witness statements, and digital records. On March 5, 2024, the jury returned guilty verdicts on all major counts. Latrice Vaughn was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for first-degree murder, plus additional concurrent sentences for the related charges. Kelvin Brent received the same sentence, also without the possibility of parole. For the Vaughn family, the verdict closed the legal chapter but not the personal loss. Matthew Vaughn, who had long lived apart from the family, assumed guardianship of his niece and her younger siblings. At Marion's church, her absence remained deeply felt. Her chair in the Bible study room left empty in her honor. The case left a lasting mark on the Killeen community, a reminder that even the most visible devotion to family can hide an unthinkable betrayal.